Hello, and welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour, the weekly bridge to the future of the piano tech community. I'm David Anderson.
And I'm Ethan Janney. And we're here to ask great questions, and then we'll shut up and listen to some of the authorities, experts, and most outstanding personalities in our little world of pianos.
So, put on your best set of headphones, and let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour once again. Having a lot of fun here. Booking a lot of really interesting guests lately, as you'll also notice today. It's going to be a fun one. Next week, I think that's next week. Is that? No, March. When's March 4th? Let's see here. March 4th. No, March 2nd. Yeah, next week. We have another really great guest, Jim Wilson. Make sure to tune in for that. He's one of us. He's a piano technician, piano tuner, who's been doing this for decades. And he's kind of like a very similar story to David Anderson. Moving to Hollywood to seek your fortune, becoming a piano tuner. Going through that route and making a life out of it. He ended up tuning for so many celebrities and eventually releasing some music. And he's just written a book. It's kind of a fun one to read as a piano technician. So he'll be here next week, Jim Wilson, and he's excited about that as well. I'm going to mention, the program now. We got a bunch of people have entered, and so I'll do the intro. Hello, if you're out on socials. And let's do it. All right, so I'll say welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We do gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world. This includes manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction for piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to this program called Piano Tech Radio Hour for just $16 a month. You get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as all our archival recordings of over 190 episodes in our member area. You can join Piano Tech Radio Hour through the link bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. And also just a reminder, we've had some really great masterclasses recently. We did a whole series on pedals and trap work and back action and dampers with Joe Jackson. We did a great masterclass on rapid tuning and ear tuning with Glenn Bingham. And we also just did a really cool masterclass on historical piano actions with Ken Walkup. And that was very interesting. If you don't know the difference between Prell-Meccanic and Stoss-Meccanic action styles, you'll learn in this lecture and see all the evolution of how piano actions have come together over the centuries. All right, so that's our program. And then this is one of those sessions where we're bringing in a special sort of guest curator, and that's Hannah Reimann, who you all are very well aware of, leading the charge in bringing narrow-keyed pianos to the world and to the musicians who will appreciate them. And so what I'm going to do for this session is introduce Hannah. We'll have a short video that she's provided, and then we're going to introduce the guest that Hannah has brought to the table. Very illustrious guest to talk with, a musician has a really incredible career, and we'll have some stories about that with Hannah. So Hannah, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ethan. As always, it is fantastic to be here with you. I've made so many exciting piano connections because of our affiliation. Mm-hmm. We now have 3 manufacturers of pianos in different countries who are building pianos with narrower keys to satisfy our artists, a collection of artists on 5 continents who are demanding piano keys to be smaller so that they will fit small hands like mine. I am super excited to be here with David Amram, who I was lucky to have shared the stage with at a wonderful festival called the Village Trip Festival here in Greenwich Village several years ago. And as we became acquainted and I found out more about his piano music, I would like to promote his piano music, and he in turn is helping us promote our festival, our artists, and many things by performing with us and engaging in dialogue like this. Our festival will be presenting live concerts from New York, Dallas, Bayreuth, Stuttgart, and Baden-Württemberg, Germany, Latvia, Melbourne, and many other wonderful places. I just in the studio where my piano is located now, I introduced it to Mariam Raya, who specializes in the music of Joseph Hoffman and plays other hugely virtuoso music. Thomas Osuga, who's my local colleague here in New York, and the great 8-time Grammy winner Arturo O'Farrell, who's also a friend of David's. So Arturo tried the piano yesterday, and he will be playing a concert for us in New York City. We're settling our venue, and we hope to get ticket links up very soon. So you want to share the video that I provided for you? That has to do with an event that's going to be happening tomorrow online.
Sounds great. Emrys is going to bring that up.
Pianists in our festival who choose to play stretto pianos have smaller keys on their piano so they can play. Can you start at the beginning of the video?
Yeah, I think it started in the middle there, Emrys.
With more Hello, my name is Hannah Ryman, and I am the founder and artistic director of Stretto Piano Concerts and the International Stretto Piano Festival. We are so excited to invite you to see videos from our online event, Rachmaninoff, His Friends and Contemporaries. As many of you might know, Rachmaninoff, who lived from 1873 to 1943, was 6'6" and could reach a 13th on the piano. Most pianists can't do that, and a lot of the pianists in our festival who choose to play stretto pianos have smaller keys on their piano so they can play Rachmaninoff's music more successfully with more expression, technical skill, and control. We're also very excited to present the 4th International Stretto Piano Festival from May 25th to June 2nd, 2024. There will be concerts and live venues all over the world and online, just like in our first 3 seasons. So please join us and learn more about what a stretto piano is. It has smaller keys. Instead of a 6.5-inch standard octave, you can play a piano that has 6.0-inch octave or a 5.5-inch octave piano, and it will change your life. It's nothing short of life-changing. So please join us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please write to us. I also want to thank my amazing team, Julia Ferlin, Eliana Yee, and Rhonda Boyle, for all the work they've done on this event and our upcoming festival. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Now, I will just say really briefly, I'm going to mute David. Yes, I muted David again. I don't know. There was some strange sound. There were some sounds, and I was like trying to mute all the appropriate people to make sure they went away. But I'm muting David for the time being. Hannah, you unmuted. That's great. We'll unmute David in a moment. Let's bring him up on the screen here and spotlight him. So let's see here. We've got David Amram, and I'll add the spotlight for him as well. And what we'd love to do is I'm going to give an intro.
No, excuse me for interrupting. Pardon me.
Yeah.
What Hannah said was fascinating. Video, I was watching it. It's about 3 seconds off. The only way I could understand it was finally to close my eyes, at least from listening to it. It was too soft, or I was able to change the volume, but you couldn't see. And I assume that that's what people would be watching if you recorded it that way. You couldn't understand anything because the video.
I think it's just streaming. It's just the streaming quality was a little bit low, but
well, it wasn't a little bit low. It was indecipherable. It was torture. You couldn't see. She was speaking and she was talking and it was jumping around.
All right.
And it was at least 3 seconds off. I couldn't even tell if it was after or before or not at all. But I'm not being nasty. But it's wonderful what she was saying, and what you're doing is wonderful. Great. But it won't be wonderful for the people watching that. They'll turn it off because they can't understand.
All right. Well, we're finished with that part. And right now, this is a little bit of torture for me. So we'll move on to the introduction to David.
No, but just before we do the whole thing, if I'm out of sync, I'm used to that. But then there's a thing known in the technical world.
It's working fine now. Everything's working fine now.
It's
so
great.
If we move on, then people won't
okay.
remember that we had a problem.
Well, I don't think they'll even watch it. I was, because I'm interested, and I closed my eyes, and what she was saying was terrific. But every time I watched the screen, it was like really, I don't mean a second or two off, but even reading lips, which I'm used to doing from when I can't hear people, sort of, it wasn't even close. Okay. I'm not being a sourpuss. It's just that I was paying attention.
All right, here we go. I'm going to intro you, David. David started his professional life in music as a French hornist in the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C. in 1951. After serving in the U.S. Army from 1952 to 54, he moved to New York City in 1955. He played French horn in the legendary jazz bands of, listen to this, Charles Mingus, Dizzy Gillespie, Lionel Hampton, and Oscar Pettiford. Holy cow. In 1957, he created and performed the first ever jazz poetry readings in New York City with novelists, you might have heard of them, Jack Kerouac, a close friend with whom Amram collaborated artistically for over 12 years. Since the early 1950s, he has traveled the world extensively, working as a musician and a conductor in over 35 countries, including Cuba, Kenya, Egypt, Pakistan, Israel, Latvia, and China. He also regularly crisscrosses the United States and Canada. He has composed scores for many films, including The Manchurian Candidate, numerous plays for Shakespeare in the Park as the composer and music director for Lincoln Center Theater. He's composed 2 operas of his own, appointed by Leonard Bernstein as the first composer in residence for the New York Philharmonic in 1966. He's now one of the most performed and influential composers of our time. And his archive of professional and personal papers were acquired by a Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts branch of the New York Public Library. He was the subject of the prize-winning full-length feature documentary David Amram, The First 80 Years, which is available on Vimeo. And Amram is the author of 4 memoirs, Upbeat, 9 Lives of Musical Cat, Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac in 2005, the highly acclaimed Vibrations, 1968 and 2007, and Amram at 90, Notes from a Promising Young Composer, published in November 2022 in celebration of his 92nd birthday. And finally, in addition to writing new music, he continues to perform around the world as a guest conductor, soloist, multi-instrumentalist, band leader at jazz, folk, and classical festivals, and narrates them in 5 languages. So, David, it's great to have you here. What an illustrious career. And what we're going to do right now is hand it back over to Hannah a little bit, because she just knows you so well and you guys have interacted so much, to get her to sort of launch into the conversation, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Hannah, take it.
David, I'm so happy you're with us. Thank you for bearing with everything we're doing up here. So, we've spoken so much about your piano music, and I am crazy about the sonata that you gave me a few years ago and the piano concerto, which I would really, really like to present with Stretto piano concerts in the next 6 months to 2 years. I'm working on finding an orchestra and funding so that we can present these amazing works. Would you please tell our audience about the piano sonata and about the piano concerto so they can know a little bit more about those two pieces?
Sure. But first of all, I'd like to thank you and the host for having this program so the people on the internet can see and hear about this music that we love, that's built to last, that has nothing to do with anything that the old music business that collapsed had unfortunately much to do with, but it has to do with the music being the star and the thing that gets all of us to, and also to send all my regards and admiration for all the people who tune pianos, who have the ability to, whether they use a tuning fork or those who do it just by ear, those who do it electronically, somehow take that thing that we call a piano and magically get it in tune. I'm always reminded of when Joni Mitchell played with the Los Angeles Philharmonic and she had those incredible guitar tunings. She was sitting there in front of the orchestra tuning away, trying to get it right, a special tuning, and they were looking more and more sour. This was in 1969. And finally she said, "Hi, fellas," to try to make everybody in the orchestra feel comfortable. And they looked at her like, "Oh, how she dares." And then she finally said, "Well, that's close enough for symphony." And everybody chuckled and the orchestra chuckled. And then, of course, she played so beautifully and played so in tune that they realized that she was actually a musical artist and she wanted to get it right. And when you mention Rudolf Serkin, I always think of going to Marlborough and having him look at my piano concerto or piano sonata way back then and say that he liked it and he'd like me to be the guest composer for the 1961 summer, which really changed my life in terms of thinking about the piano in a whole different way. And I met his piano tuner. At that time, he only went on airplanes or ships, however, with his own piano and his own piano tuner, who would be sure that it was reassembled if it was anything, even a leg was taken off, retuned, set up for the place, and was there after the first rehearsal to retune it if necessary and be able to have the instrument itself be in such a wonderful shape that Serkin could make that piano sing and not think about it. And people who tune pianos, whether they're going into someone's basement because their grandmother left them a piano, and somehow can take what would be considered to be a wrecked instrument and make it have its voice, are doing God's work too. And it's just as important in the world of music and the world of piano music as anything. Without good piano technicians, there's nothing really quite like that. And I just wanted to mention that because people now with electronic instruments, most of them don't even know that there's such a thing as an acoustic piano. And electronic pianos are great because when they don't have any budget or any hall or any piano available, or don't even know what it is, or the piano they have has been smashed by people who are used to playing with highly amplified, close to noise, not even music, they're difficult to play because when you touch the keys, there's almost nothing happening because they've been like being with someone that's been almost beaten to death. And the piano, every instrument is like every human voice. It has its own sensibilities, its own sound, its own feeling. And playing one time, and I'll make it as brief as I can, Thelonious Monk was making his big comeback because at that point in 1957, he'd been forgotten about, and he was an extraordinarily original player. And someone came by and said, "We're opening up this old coffee house. but would you like to check out the piano? And he said, sure, I'll bring my wife down with a tin can. So when they charge $1 at the door, we will have the money for the rent. So his wife came down with a tin can, Nellie, who was like an angel. He went to the piano. He said, where is it? And in the very back of the room was a kind of a khaki covered cover, all green covered. It looked like a penicillin factory with all kinds of mold. They took it off, and the entire piano was green, covered with mold. And he kind of said, oh, it just sat down and went clunk, clunk, thump, thump, thump. There was nothing. The very lowest left hand, bong, bong, and the highest, tinkle, tinkle on the right, sort of worked. So he said, okay. We went out and got a hamburger. He played all night. I can't do it on the screen because it's not wide enough, but if you can imagine the left hand, the lowest octave or 10 notes, and perhaps the highest notes on the right hand, and he played the whole night, and it was incredible. I said, Monk, how did you make that miserable old piano sound so good? And he said, quote, I was brought up on sad pianos. So I thought about that. Then I thought about what Rudolf Serkin did. Then I thought about all the pianists in between and about how a really fine artist playing the piano can play anything and make it sound like a whole different instrument. When John Nakamatsu played my piano concerto, I didn't even come to the rehearsal. I just figured I'd stay out of the way because I heard him play and I knew he was great. And he said, if you got anything to say, and I'll say, I don't want to wreck it. It was great. Then when I tried to play, it sounded like it was a different piano. The reason being, he is a great pianist and he knew how to make that piano sing and talk and get different nuances and different feelings. And each individual pianist has the ability somehow to do that. I have big hands and small technique. So when I play and improvise and play my own music, it almost sounds like I can play the piano. But if I have to play a Czerny or a Bach convention, forget about it, because I can't do that. And then I found out that people who can do that, just like the people who are tuning and get it perfectly in tune, have high standards that are beyond any of us who write music. And when I was composer in residence with the Philharmonic, I heard Leonard Bernstein play the Mozart 20th. I said, oh my God, it was just like perfect. I said, Lenny, that's incredible how with everything you do, you're such a great pianist. And he said, oh, it was dreadful. I haven't practiced in 20 years. But he had that ability to make the piano sing. And he always had great tuners and great technicians who looked after the pianos like they would lovingly, because they cared about the piano and about the music and about the people who were coming to hear the music, and respect and love for those who created it.
Well, much appreciated. That's beautiful. Yeah, we've talked in this program quite a bit about the interface between the technician and the musician. Whenever we have a musician on, we like to ask them, about their experiences with technicians, but thinking of it as a collaboration, especially in that case where you're traveling with a piano and the technician, the performances, if you think about them as a collaboration, right? Between the musician, the tuner, maybe even the manufacturer of the piano, right? It's all, it has to come together to make things work.
Absolutely.
And then in the other side of things, the best musicians, they work with what they've got. I think we've seen a bit of a pattern. You do your best as a technician to bring the piano to life for a pianist, but the most professional of them, when they sit down at the piano, game over, you just play that thing and you make it sound as good as you can. And I've heard similar stories of people doing a lot with very little in terms of what the piano provides.
Mark Morganelli has a jazz place, and most of the pianists who happen to play there have studied European classical piano. Many of them can excel in that. People like Sir Roland Hanna could play the classical repertoire beautifully. so many people like Art Tatum were so phenomenal that people in the 30s and 40s, before it was considered to be chic or fashionable, Horowitz and other people came all the way up to Harlem just to hear him play. But then there are people that don't play that way, but those who do all appreciate the piano that Mark Morganelli got, a beautiful Steinway, and they had a special fundraiser for a year for the piano. It was a fundraiser for the instrument. And boy, when you sit down and play that after you play 3 chords, you can play better than you've ever played before, because the piano already does something for what you're playing. For those who play notated classical music, which is what I do, sitting in the room all day and throwing stuff in the wastebasket till I come out with something that sounds natural, but is actually worked out from the great natural players and natural music I've heard. When you do that, you're just kind of tuning all the idea of the piece itself, and you get a chance to do it more than once. Instead of using a tuning fork, you can use the razor, the wastebasket, and your DNA from what's beautiful that remains in there from all the other stuff that isn't that beautiful that you put aside. And I think watching someone tune the piano is magical, to see how in heaven's name is possible to do that, and to realize that you can't do it yourself if you're not trained. And even if you are trained, just to get it in that perfect way makes such a difference and makes it so much easier to play. And if you're composing with an instrument that really is lovingly taken care of, which I get to do once in a while, it's just heaven, because you can hear an orchestra, you can hear an opera singer, you can hear everything 5 times better. And imagine, because everything is there done correctly by people who are musical. And it remains a mystery why it is so beautiful. And then when you play music from India and you hear where they don't have a different idea of tuning than we do for scales and so forth, and Middle Eastern music and a lot of music from all over the world, every place has kind of their system, but they're really more or less forced to tune themselves by singing and hearing it, or having instruments that are that. And when I was in Egypt, they had a switch on the piano where you could tune 2 or 3 levers and have that quarter tone put in at a certain note. And at first you say, what? And then after you hear it for about 4 days, you get to love it. And then when you come back to Western tuning, you sort of you miss it somehow. You miss that sound of what seems to be out of tune actually is in tune for that particular kind of music, that particular one of hundreds of scales or modes that they use. But they're all done with the knowledge. And in Turkish music and the saz and those things, they even have an 8th tone. But then when they have the quarter tone music festivals, after a while you realize sometimes people really like the ancient music players who gravitate towards it because they love it, but because they don't have the chops, as they say, to play regular music. The quarter tones are used for that particular purpose, and for just using the regular tunings that we have, the Western way of doing it, there's so much repertoire, and there's so much magnificent music. And when you hear Chopin and see how he made that simple piano sound so fantastic, or you hear Bach and you hear Glenn Gould play the Goldberg variations, and you can hear all the different lines, it's uncanny and magical. And then as a composer, you have standards that you can go by of excellence and lasting beauty. And it's so important to keep acoustic music alive. And that doesn't mean other kinds of music can't be written. And Stravinsky finally said, sometimes in his poetics, he said, first of all, music expresses itself. Amen. And secondly, sometimes we'll play the same chord almost the same chord 14 times to be sure that it's the right voicings for that particular part of the piece he's composing. And by hearing it on the piano, that enables you to choose which one you can have. The one time when I played at about 4 o'clock in the morning at a party Thelonious Monk was at, I thought he was asleep. So even though I was remains of a French horn player, I was playing the piano. He said, "Hey, it sounds pretty good." I said, "Monk, if I'd known you were listening, I would have been afraid to even play a note." He said, "No," he said, "with the piano, you can not only hear it, you can see it." And I say that to all guitar players. I say, first of all, when you're tuning up, try to hang out with a piano tuner sometime and find out what it's really like to get in tune all the way up and down and in between. And secondly, if you're playing the piano and composing and you see something and you're not sure where the notes are, you can see it as well as hear it. And then in slow motion, write it down so you remember and you can get that great chord. Whereas on the guitar, you might be playing instinctively, but you're never sure of what the notes are. So the piano is a wonderful instrument.
Hey,
And
David,
Yeah, Hannah has a question.
question just came into my mind. Whenever I hear you talking about all these amazing people, I don't think I ever asked you, did you ever meet Joseph Hoffman?
No, but I admired him from afar.
Did you ever hear him play?
There's still recordings of his that you can get.
Definitely.
Thank heavens for the internet. I hate to anger anybody who does who passed the 14th century, but you can hear music from the 14th century played that you never could have bought in a record store. And on the internet, you can hear Joseph Hoffman. You can hear Debussy playing his music, and his playing Clair de Lune. Woo! It's different than anyone else plays it, but it sure sounds good. You can even hear the old piano rolls of Brahms at the very end of his life playing something, and you can hear George Gershwin in the part in Rhapsody in Blue that's almost impossible to play, and you figure, well, and he's doing it. He could play it faster than he even did it in the recording, and he could play incredible piano. He was an incredible pianist, and you can hear him and understand that his composing came from his experience. And Scott Joplin's Treemonisha, we can imagine he was known more as a pianist until those ragtime pieces were published. But he wrote that stuff out, and there's still, thanks to Vivian Peerless, and Gunther Schuller, you can hear a lot of his music. And Joseph Hoffman is just one of those great teachers that thank heavens, we can hear some of his music. And Rachmaninoff, incredible composer and pianist who wanted to be a conductor, begrudgingly wrote music. And he was such a hot player, he could play it all. And for him, as you mentioned earlier, playing a 10th was nothing, because he could, what you say, a 13th or something? He had huge hands. But I never realized till I met Hannah that, first of all, I didn't notice that she had small hands. I heard her first playing. She was singing and playing a tribute to Joni Mitchell. I said, boy, that pianist really can play the piano. I mean, aside from thunk, thunk, clunk,
Now,
clunk, tinkle, tinkle.
is that how you guys met? Did you met at a concert of Hannah's? Is that what happened?
A concert is we were at the Village Gate, and I won't go into the details except to say that the person who put it on, God bless her, put it on and had no concept of people, music, the community of Greenwich Village. And Hannah came with this amazing guitar player who was also like a perfect musician, sang up a storm after a bunch of us had played, and then stayed over an extra hour to play the other pieces that weren't that well known by Joni Mitchell, sang beautifully, and also played the piano. Then I heard her play her classical piano. I said, oh my God. And the recording that she made with her ex-husband, it sounded, like the people playing in the Metropolitan Opera, only in a folk idiom. Combine knowing those languages, because each one is a special feeling and a special language, plus her own language. and that's a good thing.
Hmm.
It's not crossover
How
because
long
there's
ago?
nothing.
How
There's
long ago
nothing to
was
cross
this?
over to. It's all the land of beauty.
I
How
think
long
it
ago
was
was this,
about
Hannah?
4 years ago. It
Okay.
was before the pandemic. I'm
Yeah.
confused.
Okay.
We met
Relatively
before the
recently.
pandemic at the bitter end, and we played together in this songwriters hootenanny, and it was really an amazing experience. I sang a bossa nova song, and David just jumped in and improvised, playing on penny whistles. He can play anything on a penny whistle, and he played Black Orpheus with me. And then I sang something by Joan Baez, because the woman who runs this Village Trip is a huge Joan Baez fan. And then David did a bunch of songs. The other people did a bunch of songs. And I heard him play a tune called Pull My Daisy, and he talked about a movie that he made with Jack Kerouac. And I was at that time producing. I had my piano in a public space, and I said, David, I want to see that movie. Why don't we have a screening of the movie and you can play afterwards? And it was magical. We showed the movie. He talked about the movie, and the place was packed. There were all these people asking him about his history with Kerouac. And then afterwards, he played It's a Wonderful World, and he played Pull My Daisy, and he talked to everyone just as naturally as he is now. And I just love working with him, and I want people to know his piano music as well as his identity. He's this, multi-genre composer who's just a great example for all of us.
So David, let's go back all the way, because we, in your intro, we started at your musical career in Washington, D.C. What's your earliest? When did you know you were going to be a professional musician? When did you foresee this great career of, being center stage in all these different places? Like, how did this evolve from your earliest? What's your earliest memory of music and it touching you?
Well, I never wanted, and I still at 93 never wanted, nor do I want a career, as they call it. I hope someday, and it's almost happening while I'm still alive, but someday my music has a career. So C.F. Peters, who has published my stuff now for 60 years, has it available. So now a generation of musicians are finally discovering yesterday's boy wonder. And beside that, they can see the paper, and if they hear and feel something from what I've done, they can take the time to look at it and check it out and say, gee, I like that. And I have a whole bunch of, after being composer and artist with the New York Philharmonic, I got past the struggling point where they would go past the first page, then get put on the programs of the tax deductible write-off, nobody show up, modern music concerts. Then meeting people like Hannah and Elmira Darivarova, who has the New York Chamber Festival, I was put on programs where there's also Brahms and other composers whose music lasted. And my hope is that, and when the Philadelphia Orchestra and other orchestras played my stuff, that perhaps the music would speak for itself, and it wouldn't say, okay, we don't know what category to put them in, because I was writing melody, harmony, and counterpoint all my life, not because I thought that's the only thing to do, but that's what I felt I had to say and contribute to. And therefore being not even out of fashion, but sort of like a caveman, Cro-Magnon, bipolar nothing, and playing in bars and playing every single thing I've done outside of the classical music establishment of yore was not because I was slumming, but because I was learning something, feeling something, and being with people who were better than I'd ever be, who would show me what I could go for. And I still do that with every single person I meet, to try to make a soul-to-soul connection, to learn something and encourage other people. And it's amazing what you can learn and what you can then share with other people if you start doing that. And when you're sitting in a room composing a classical piece, to write something down and then look back at it and say, wait a minute, that sounds like a bunch of BS. Taking the wastebasket, the greatest invention of the 20th century, and an eraser and throwing it away until eventually everything that you have makes sense, has a form, like all great classical music of yesteryear always had. Every note counts, and it has a form of some kind and a structure, so you can use the classical sensibility along with the human sensibility and come up with something that's your own voice, to what you love, and then hope for the best, because there's no guarantee. But doing what you're told to do, whether you want to be a pop musician or a rock musician or a jazz musician or whatever category they used to have in the record bins, or a cross-cultural whatever beat, that's what they used to destroy all the writers who were friends of Jack Kerouac with, or bebop. Dizzy hated that term. Whatever category, in college you're taught anti-rebus after the fact, and no, before the fact, and post-rebus. So usually with the post-rebus, after it's happened, then you always get a bunch of experts who explain to why it happened. But why it happened, we'll never know, except the people dug it somehow and saw the whole picture. And the that's the anti-rebus. The post-rebus is trying to find out where it's coming from, how it happened, respecting those whose culture or whose thinking or works it came from, and then what you can do to absorb that and maybe build upon that. And most of the people that I read about who aren't here anymore all had a pretty difficult time during their time, because they weren't what young people are told today to build their lives. Yeah, we got to do this and do that, and music, art, poetry, acoustic music, classical music, dead. Don't bother. So my hope is that if people can see someone in their 90s still grateful and enthusiastic and appreciative of being able to somehow pay their rent, take care of their kids, and survive doing what they love to do, and being happy and healthy doing it, maybe they'll say, in spite of all that career counseling, they shouldn't even bother or care. They'll say to themselves, maybe I'll give it 2 more years anyway. And if that happens, then I will have made some kind of contribution. And my hope.
Did you ever think about becoming an accountant or something? Just something practical?
No, I thought
never.
about all those things. And when I was sitting on a tractor on our farm, I was 10 years old, my father said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I want to be a farmer like you." He said, "No, you have to have other work. 160-acre farm cannot cut it." And this was way back in 1939, 1940. So he said, "What else?" And I said, "I'd like to be a classical composer and a jazz musician." And he paused,
Okay.
and he said, "That's worse." So I always was told, follow your heart, and if you feel you were put here to do something, even if it's deemed impossible, do it anyway and hope for the best. And if you have another way to pay your rent, that doesn't diminish you as an artist or a person. You're still pursuing your dream and what you love to do, and respect all those others who do it. And for those who do it better than you or get more recognition, have respect for them rather than being jealous and angry. And if you do that, life is a constant, what I call the university of hangoutology, learning from others who know more than you, getting little tidbits of information and putting that in your memory bank. And I think of those piano tuners sitting there with that tuning fork. Half the time they're coming into someone's home that doesn't even know how to play the piano or what it is, and they're creating the highest standard of a magical thing, plus an enormous technical skill, a great ear, and their own creativity into part of the process. So sometimes if you forget that you're not alone and there are other people who can make what you're doing better, then you're missing the boat. Because if you try to tune it yourself, which I tried to do, and a lot of other people do,
We get to keep
as
our
they
jobs.
say,
We get to
as they
keep our
say in
jobs,
the
Jim.
Sopranos, forget about it, because that's an art too, just like the art of cooking, the art of teaching, the art of living. All those things are important.
How did you meet 𝐵𝐎𝐄𝐀𝐓? What's the story behind that, and how did you kind of build that relationship?
Well, very briefly, I've told this to Hannah, I guess, and I'll make the shorter version. I was at a bring your own bottle party where we used to go in the 1950s. And for those of us on the lower economic party schedule circuit, which was just about everybody I knew. And the painters always had lofts in what they now call Soho, which were then abandoned sweatshops, because they had the biggest space where they could put their paintings 10 feet off the floor so they wouldn't get burnt by partying people coming on the weekends with the cigarette butt or drinks splattered on them. And the painters who couldn't get in art galleries would have an open house, and people would bring their own bottle of whatever, Dr. Brown's black cherry soda or Gallo wine or whatever was most affordable, or potato chips or a dance step or a part of a novel that they'd written or a poem or just their own sunny personalities, and all meet and greet and have a great big party with art opening and spontaneous music with no admission, no cover, no minimum. So I went to the bring your own bottle party after playing with Charles Mingus and had my little penny whistles and my French horn with me. And this guy in a lumber jacket looked like a unemployed French Canadian logger or woodsman, said, "Play for me," handed me some paper, and then took the paper back before I could read it. And he started reading this poem. I didn't know if it was Baudelaire or Céline or Victor Hugo or himself. It was partly in French, partly in English. And I just got that feeling like I did when I first played with Dizzy Gillespie or Thelonious Monk, or after hours sessions with the people at the Marlborough Chamber Festival. Just got that feeling of some kind of a connection. I didn't know what it was, but just felt something made me feel part of it. And then we kept bumping into each other at different bring your own bottle parties, doing the same thing. Then he told us his name was Jack, and then he said it was Jack Kerouac. He'd been a football player. I had been a gym teacher, and I spoke French, and he spoke French at home. And then from there, we built a friendship. And then we did the first jazz poetry readings just for fun. And in the Village, it was just so much fun. And then that became sort of a big fashionable thing after On the Road came out. And we did 2 or 3 more readings, and he couldn't stand being the king of the beatniks because he had read more classical stuff than anybody I ever knew in many languages, knew more about all kinds of comparative religions than any professor I'd ever met, and was so interested in history and in people, and enjoyed the beauties of what he called the diamonds in the sidewalk, seeing all those beautiful things that surround us that we don't pay attention to. And I really admired and became friends of his, and we did a lot of work together. I wrote a cantata where I used part of his Lonesome Traveler, and a group of songs I hope to do on one, especially in one of Hannah's concerts, called Take Me Back to the Village, set, which a written out song, not anything that I improvise. And I just admired him and all that he went through when he became fashionable. Suddenly everybody jumped on his gravy train. Then when he became unfashionable, they all leapt off his gravy train. And somehow, even though that hurt his feelings, he survived and continued to write and continued to do what he do till alcohol destroyed him at the end. Mm. But his writing remains glorious. And now people appreciate him all over the world in different languages, and they don't think of him as a beat personality. They see and feel him as a writer of distinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting to hear the kind of behind the scenes there on that. And did you, I'm assuming you kind of ran into all of the the people on the scene there in the village and things like that. I keep thinking of Allen Ginsberg. Is that someone that you spend any time with?
Oh yeah, I knew him way before I knew Jack. He was a brilliant guy, brilliant, and helped out a lot of people, very big-hearted, and also became the super salesman for the beat generation. And I think, understandably, not wanting, he finally became a professor at Brooklyn College. He was a terrific teacher, but I think he didn't really want to be entrenched in the academic world and wear a tweed coat with patches on his sleeve. And I'm not sure he would have been at home there. So he went along with that beat generation stuff and tried to get into the rock and roll empire when it wasn't. Well, rock and roll is not a very good definition either, because the original players, Chuck Berry, B.B. King, Little Richard, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and some of those monster people who started all that, inspired the English rock and rollers to the extent that when Eric Burdon and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones came over to the United States, even though they didn't use acoustic pianos for the most part, still, all they did in all their interviews was talk about Little Richard and Chuck Berry and B.B. King and the Platters and the Flamingos and the Coasters and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, so much that those people who were working here sometimes as building superintendents or playing on weekends got into their own stardom in the United States where they came from, because when they go over to England, those guys that were so famous here were their opening acts. So they grew up, it took an invasion of the English people over here to show us how beautiful our music was. And it was a French guitar player who actually Gypsy, who showed us when he played with Duke Ellington, what we now call gypsy jazz was something from the 1930s that we had here. Stefan Grappelli, who played violin with him, introduced what Joe Venuti and so many other fantastic jazz violinists had been doing here for a long time. And a lot of the music, when Louis Armstrong played for the King of England, held up his trumpet and said, "This is for you, Rex," and played a piece in the box seat. They got so much publicity that people started realizing, gee whiz, this, and then this must be so. And then when they had a lot of the jazz artists here go to Europe, they said, wow, they began to see, that here, that this music meant something in other places more than entertainment in bars. And in turn, a lot of the great classical music that we have today and the great orchestras are a result of the World War II, where those people from Europe had to come here in order not to be incarcerated in a concentration camp or have their lives ruined, and brought that cultural feeling with them and helped a whole generation and the next generation of people like Hannah to be able to do that music in that style as well or better than their teachers, and add a special flavor that we have. And music has a way of going different places and bringing us together and creating harmony that we can't imagine. It's still our greatest ambassador. When the Philadelphia Orchestra toured, you went to China, and when the New York Philharmonic went to North Korea, where they hated us and they ended up loving us because they were such a good concert, that makes a big difference. And that's the great thing about music. And that's the part that's never discussed, because no one can make out of money or fame out of making other people feel good.
Yeah. Well,
we spend, and music does that, and people spend billions of dollars on all kinds of drugs and fake gurus and fake mental health healers, how to feel groovy. And the reality is music does that magically, and we don't even know why. So for those of you who
playing music too, yeah, I think like more people could play music and get what you get out of that. Yeah, I have to I have to say we're basically over time here. We usually end right at the end of the hour, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up. But I really appreciate you joining us, David. You clearly, in addition to having your own illustrious catalog that you've built that will speak for itself, as is your wish, you really had a front row seat to the development of music and cultural history in the United States and globally in New York City. It's pretty amazing. It would have been wonderful to be a fly on the wall, alongside you in all these great situations.
Well, it's
But
wonderful
thank
to
you so
see
much
your
for joining us.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
great. I thank Hannah for those of you who were playing music and maybe working at a dry cleaning store or teaching in junior high school. Don't despair, because rather than being an angry woman and spending the rest of her life cursing at how rotten society is to her and the artists, she's creating her own space and giving other people a chance to express themselves all around the world, celebrating the piano as an important instrument in an electronic so-called era. Uh, all the Kammer music, chamber music, was done at home using pianos. And the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people with small hands that even those of us that are big music fans never thought about, because we never were forced. I have big hands, but all the people I knew with small hands never were forced to play certain Chopin pieces or pieces where, God knows, not Rachmaninoff, where you couldn't stretch out, and we're killing ourselves to do it. And now with the Stretto piano, that's like a whole other world, giving hundreds of thousands of people an opportunity to play up a storm without having to strain themselves to do it. In the tenor world, if you're not a,
Thank you.
if you're
That's so kind of you.
if you're not a countertenor, there's a lot of great stuff you can't sing. But for the Stretto piano, that takes that bar away, and you can play the 13th or whatever, or just about anything. But it's adapted to someone whose hands fit that. And all the stuff I've written, I put in ninths all the time, because it never occurs to me that they have to find a way that it would present a problem not to play them both at the same time. And,
Well,
and Hannah's, yeah,
we will share your music with this community, David. When the recordings, Thomas Weaver will be recording David's sonata this year. He'll be featured at our festival. We will be in touch with you all with links and Spotify and everything, and you'll be able to hear all of David's beautiful music.
Yes.
Find him on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
I'm gonna be doing a deep dive later and check out your stuff. Okay, I will say we've reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks, of course, to David and Hannah for joining us today, as well as everyone in the audience. Remember, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. For those of you that joined us today, if you sign up just for this session individually, hey, make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour to $16 a month. Get the recording of today's session in our member area. Automatic registration for each week's new session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. And I know some of you are dropping out as we do the outro, but I'm just remembering to let you know a couple of things. Our guest next week, we talked about a little bit about the British invasion and stuff like that. He's made friends with Paul McCartney, and we'll tell stories about that and so on. But also, we are beginning to release episodes of Piano Tech Radio Hour, our newer episodes on the podcast. So if you didn't notice the disparity, typically we were releasing archival episodes of Piano Tech Radio Hour out as the podcast. And so you're getting content that's about 2 years old. And just recently, with an episode from 𝐿𝐻𝐿 White, we're going to be releasing these episodes. So, for example, this episode you'll probably see in about a month out on the podcast. So subscribe to the podcast, and you can keep up to date with everything we're doing here. But always remember to show up live so you can get the first listen to everything that's going on and get a good look at stuff. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you later. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. Remember that you can catch us live online every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
That's right. Go to pianotechradio.com to register so you can interact live and ask questions of our guests.
See you next week.